Questions 38 through 42. Listen to a talk given in a university class.
Cars weren't always put together on a moving assembly line. In fact, it wasn't until 1913 that Henry Ford began to assemble Model T Fords on a conveyor belt that moved the partially built cars past a long line of workers who each repeated one or two tasks over and over until the cars were completed. Before the assembly line, workers built automobiles one at a time. The process was slow, especially since the workers often had to handcraft the parts as they went along. The biggest problem with the old system was that the cars were so expensive to make that most people couldn't afford them. Today, fully automated assembly lines exist in nearly every industry. But what are the downsides? First and foremost is the boredom that so many people experience when they repeat one or two small tasks all day long. A number of innovative steps have been taken to make work on an assembly line more interesting and in the process improve the quality and productivity of the line. For example, workers in many plants have been given responsibility for quality control. If they see something in the product that doesn't look right, they can pull a rope which halts the entire line until the problem is fixed. Another innovation which has improved job satisfaction is the organization of teams in which workers can perform a number of tasks rather than one set task. Some plants now have craft stations, where a team of workers may spend up to 30 minutes on dozens of separate tasks. Henry Ford might not agree with some of these innovations, but he certainly was pleased by the first result of his new assembly line. He cut the cost of his cars by half, and for the first time, large numbers of people could afford to buy them.
Number 38. How were cars built before the assembly line? Number 39. What course would this talk be most appropriate for? Number 40. What were some of the problems traditionally associated with assembly lines? Number 41. What can we infer from this talk about the connection between employee satisfaction and productivity? Number 42. According to the speaker, what did the early assembly line do for Henry Ford's business? Questions 43 through 46. Listen to an American literature professor give an introductory lecture on a famous American author.
Ernest Hemingway is one of America's most beloved 20th century authors. He was born in 1899. During World War I, he served as a volunteer ambulance driver in Italy, and he later served in the Italian infantry. Hemingway was badly wounded in 1918. Hemingway's wartime experiences had a considerable influence on his writing. In fact, most of his novels focus on the need for physical and psychological strength to cope with difficulty and often violence. He was quite disillusioned by the war and became a leader of a group of young writers living in Europe who were known as the Lost Generation. Hemingway was fascinated by the sport of bullfighting and described it in many of his novels and short stories. He also hunted big game in Africa, such as elephants, buffalo, lions, and tigers. He described his experiences as a hunter in a nonfiction book entitled The Green Hills of Africa. Like Hemingway himself, his fictional heroes presented a tough, masculine image. Yet his strong men had to courageously accept their fate. In The Old Man and the Sea, one of Hemingway's most renowned short novels, an old fisherman struggles for hours to bring in a huge and beautiful fish, only to have the fish eaten by sharks. Toward the end of Hemingway's life, he became sick, both physically and mentally. This man, who had written so eloquently about facing adversity with courage and grace, committed suicide in 1961.
Number 43. According to the speaker, what effect did Hemingway's war experiences have on his writing? Number 44. What did Hemingway describe in his book called The Green Hills of Africa? Number 45. According to the speaker, how was Hemingway's own image similar to that of many of his fictional characters? Number 46. What irony does this speaker imply about Hemingway's suicide? Questions 47 through 50. Listen to this talk about pests and pesticides given in an environmental science class.
We know that insecticides kill not only pests, but beneficial insects as well. We want beneficial insects, or beneficials for short, in our gardens because they eat the pests that eat our plants. When we kill our beneficials, we make it easier for the pests to survive. In fact, without a substantial supply of beneficials, pest control for gardens is temporary at best. Many beneficial insects are sold at garden centers and by mail, but most gardens are already alive with native beneficials such as ladybugs, suffrage flies, and parasitic wasps. With proper design of the garden and good gardening practices, these beneficials can be encouraged to stay in the garden, multiply, and eat pests. Beneficial insects require lots of energy to search for prey. When pests are scarce, beneficials rely on pollen, a source of protein, and plant nectar, a source of carbohydrates, for energy. Certain plants should be planted in the garden specifically to attract beneficials. These are plants which produce large quantities of pollen and nectar. In the garden, beneficial insects generally prefer one of two environments. Some, such as ground spiders and beetles, look for food on the ground. Others look for prey in the leaves or flowers of garden plants high above the ground. Since it requires lots of energy to maneuver through garden plants, these high-flying beneficials are the ones most attracted to the nectar and pollen-producing plants. Beneficials are also distinguishable by their eating habits. Some, known as specialists, are choosy about what they eat. Others eat all sorts of pests. These generalists are important because when a particular pest is scarce, there are others to eat. A garden should have both specialists and generalists.
Number 47. According to the speaker, why is it undesirable to use insecticides on a garden? Number 48. According to the speaker, how does growing the right plants help reduce pests? Number 49. What are the two different environments in which beneficials search for prey? Number 50. In this talk, what are specialists and generalists?